A fish farmer named Fan Li wrote a manual, not about war, not about politics, about a hole filled with water. That sounds too simple to matter, but that hole fed people for years, quietly, reliably, in some places for generations. No supermarket, no industrial feed, no fragile supply chain, just water, life, and a design so efficient that once it was built correctly, it kept giving. Build it once, and it can feed you for decades. That is what makes this idea feel strange today. We are used to systems that must be bought, managed, and paid for again and again. But this was different. This was not just a pond, it was a biological machine that fed itself first, and then fed the family living beside it. By the end of this video, you will understand how a small pond can become one of the most productive systems on a piece of land. Not a decorative pond, not wasted space, a living pond. A pond that can hold water, grow fertility, support ducks, raise fish, and quietly turn a small area into long-term food security. The logic behind it is ancient. Thousands of years ago, people noticed that after floods, fish remained trapped in low areas as the water retreated. That observation changed everything. If the low area was deepened and the edges strengthened, the water stayed longer. The fish stayed alive. Nature had already started the system. Humans only learned how to continue it. That was the real beginning of pond culture. Not domination over nature, not factory thinking. Observation. Partnership. The strongest old systems were often not invented in the modern sense. They were discovered by watching how water moved, how fertility gathered, and how life organized itself. Once people understood what permanent water could do, ponds became too valuable to ignore. Over time, ponds became part of everyday agriculture. Household ponds, village ponds, estate ponds, monastic ponds. They were not just decoration, they were infrastructure. Food close to home, stored protein, quiet resilience. Today, many people see a pond as a pretty feature, maybe a place for lilies or frogs. But for much of history, a pond was something far more practical. Survival made visible. Then, agriculture changed. Small ecological systems lost ground to centralized industrial ones. Food moved into larger structures, livestock facilities, feed chains, transport, retail. Bigger systems were easier to regulate and easier to monetize. A small, self-sustaining pond did not fit that world very well. It produced food too quietly, too locally, and too independently. So the knowledge did not always disappear through force. Often it simply stopped being taught. That is how useful knowledge fades. One generation uses it, the next hears less about it. The next sees only a muddy problem: mosquitoes, algae, stagnant water, wasted land. But Fan Li looked at the same pond and saw something else entirely: a living engine. Modern researchers eventually returned to old pond systems, especially polycultures where several species share the same water and each performs a different role. And the pattern became clear again. A small pond can produce surprising amounts of food, but only when it is treated as an ecosystem. The secret was never just add fish. The secret was ecology. A productive pond is not one organism. It is a relationship between 4 living forces: ducks, plants, fish, and bacteria. The ducks move nutrients and reduce insects. The plants filter and stabilize water. The fish occupy different feeding zones. The bacteria process waste and complete the nutrient cycle. That is what turns still water into a food web. Ducks are not an extra in this system. They are part of its momentum. They disturb insect breeding, stir the upper water, and return nutrients back into the pond. Plants are not clutter either. They shade, oxygenate, and absorb excess fertility. Fish divide the water into useful layers, and the invisible bacterial world makes sure waste becomes nutrition instead of collapse. So how do you build one? First, work with the land. The best pond site is usually where water already wants to gather. Then build in layers, a deeper center for stability and shallower edges for plants, spawning, and life at the margins. A pond is not truly built when the hole is dug. It begins when relationships begin. The order matters. First water, then plants, then time. Only after that should ducks and fish enter the system. This is the part modern thinking dislikes most: waiting. But a pond is not a machine you switch on. It is a living field that must assemble in sequence. Rush it, and you inherit instability. Respect the order, and the biology begins carrying the work. At first, the change may look small. A little more life at the edges. A little more plant mass. A little more movement in the water. Then one day the pond stops feeling empty. Birds arrive. Fish move with confidence. Plants settle into their roles. The margins come alive. The whole place begins to feel less like a project and more like an organism that knows what it is doing. Then winter comes. For many people, that sounds like the end of the idea. But winter does not mean failure. It means the pond shifts into another mode. The surface may freeze. Activity slows. Fish move deeper. The visible energy becomes quiet. But quiet is not death. In a well-designed pond, winter is part of resilience, not the end of it. And this brings us to the real value of the pond. Not just fish, not just eggs, not just water. Independence. Not fantasy, not total self-sufficiency, but real, measurable independence. The kind that lowers your dependence on shelves, trucks, packaging, and weekly prices. The kind that makes a piece of land more alive every year, instead of more exhausted. What ancient fish farmers understood was simple. If you work with ecology instead of against it, life begins doing part of the work for you. A hole with water becomes a habitat. A habitat becomes a food web. A food web becomes security. The biology never disappeared. People simply stopped seeing it.